everybody. Welcome to Freight Executive Insights, FEI. I am Michael Vincent. I am not the host. Oh, well, I am the host, actually. I'm not the freight executive with the insights, but my soon-to-be good friend, Kevin Zweier, is. We had a long discussion about how German he actually is. I'd like to call him Zweier. But anyways, brother, he is vice president of transportation practice at NTT Data, which I'm a data geek wannabe. So this interests the hell out of me. And I think all you private fleet people out there are going to love this as well. Kevin, welcome to the show, my brother. How are you?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me. Good morning,
Yeah.
good evening, good afternoon, whatever it is.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Yeah.
Right? From the Truman Show is what that is. So quickly, what is NTT Data? And I think most people out there that are running fleets and are in the transportation industry and logistics understand the value of data. But what is NTT Data doing?
Well, most of us will probably remember us more from the Chainalytics days. So our supply chain consulting practice at Chainalytics was bought by NTT Data about 2.5 years ago. NTT Data itself is a top 10 global IT services company all across the world. Started in Japan. We're in the North America group here on the consulting side. Our focus within the supply chain consulting group ranges from helping shippers design their physical supply chain network, how many locations they should have, where they should be, which DCs service which customers, those types of things. We do work in planning and inventory optimization, help people figure out how to design their warehouses and the flow through those warehouses, help shippers design packaging to reduce packaging costs or reduce damage that occurs in transit. And then on the transportation side of things, which is what, of course, I'm most interested in and you're most interested in, we help shippers look at their private and dedicated fleets and how to make the best use of those within their networks. We do a lot of work on the technology side, evaluating, implementing, selecting transportation technologies like TMS systems, visibility systems, freight payment and audit systems, and finally do a lot of modeling and transportation procurement work across pretty much all modes and all geographies.
Gotcha. So, I mean, all of it's interesting. And I mean, when you say like you're looking at packaging and stuff like that, and then you say, well, transportation would be interested in this other stuff. Transportation's interested in packaging too, right?
Of course.
Yeah. Because I mean, there's all these claims and stuff. And it's like, no, it's a shipper's fault. No, it's a trucker's fault. He shouldn't have been driving recklessly. Yeah, but you should brace. You can't load your trailer and build your packaging based on perfect transport. That's foolhardy. It's ridiculous because it's never going to happen. Well, it happens, but it's not something you should be counting on perfect, right? I remember we used to, as a training exercise to show new recruits, et cetera, how to load trailers, et cetera. Mm-hmm. We'd take some freight and put it on the rear of a trailer and just drive it around the parking lot and bring it back. And it'd just be a mess, destroyed. And people don't understand that. At highway speeds, a 1 inch will like quadruple the weight on the back of that trailer. And just crush everything. It just goes to nothing, right?
Yeah, and a lot of packaging improvements. The proverbial cost savings that you're getting is associated with the logistics of moving it around, right? If you can get more on a truck, it's more efficient, more environmentally friendly, and you're gonna get a better cost position out of it. So a lot of the savings that we derive from packaging improvements. Or you're really seeing more within transportation anyway.
Yeah, sure. And if you're an LTL type of shipper, if you ship LTL, then you really should be shipping it to protect it, but also ease of loading for that LTL person. Making it hard for them to put stuff on top of it or it on top of other freight is not a smart move. That's a stupid move.
Yeah, we've done some really funky things there. We've helped figure out how to package planes in an ocean container.
Oh, nice. That's cool.
That's cool. Which when I heard, like, didn't immediately make sense, but if they're brand new planes and you're having to ship them, and all right, you don't. I guess you could fly it, but if you're talking more, smaller, smaller.
Yeah. We're not
Type
talking. You're
planes
not
that can,
putting a Airbus in a container. Yeah,
exactly.
well, you could in containers.
Yeah,
But
they do some funky stuff.
yeah, they do. No, 100%. I've shipped some strange stuff ocean in my time. But let's get into the fleet and the data in the fleet. You're talking about all the different things that you do for shippers within that. And so I imagine a lot of it you're working on is it route optimization and that type of stuff? And then you talk about fleet utilization. Is it kind of working with the people and understanding when to use your own fleet and when not to use your own fleet? And how does I imagine it is? I see you nodding your head as if, yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, roll with that. What's going on?
Yeah, the answer is yes to all of those. Not
Okay.
necessarily always at the same time, though.
Right.
So,
Right.
we'll do a lot of what we call modeling and optimization work around fleets. And that can take the form of trying to figure out what is the appropriate size for someone's private or dedicated fleet. Where should it be domiciled? What location should it be based at? What should its mission be? What lanes within the shipper's network should that fleet be operating on? So, and that
Mm,
constantly changes, right? Because as the common carrier transportation market changes, that affects where it makes the most sense to utilize your fleet.
right.
It's not a set it and forget it type of exercise for most of these large private and dedicated fleets that are out there. We do get down to the routing and scheduling side of things as well, of trying to figure out, okay, well, what is the set of static routes that we're going to put in place here? What are the trade-offs if we end up doing more dynamic routing? As well, so we can look at what makes sense from a static versus dynamic standpoint, because different shippers want to do different things there. Um, we'll also get into just how does a shipper set up their network to allow their fleet to be the most efficient. So you can think of this real simply is looking at access hours for facilities, right? If I can get into locations at different times, does that allow my fleet to be more efficient in how we're building the routes that the fleet is going to operate on? And what is the value
Mm.
of that from a cost standpoint? What's the value of that from a service improvement standpoint to our customer? So there's a lot of different pieces that we can hit depending upon frankly what the challenges are and what our customer is wanting to investigate.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff that needs to be done, and there's a lot of inputs that are there. And you talk about TMS as well, right? How does it? If you're a private fleet, um, the ignorant person in me says, "What do you need a TMS for? Just route optimization." But is that to blend everything together? Is that what the TMS is for?
Well, the reality is most shippers who have a private fleet are also significant buyers of purchase transportation from the common carrier market as well. And
Okay.
so unless they're 100% private fleet, they're still going to need to figure out how to assign, tender, track all of the common carrier loads that are out there as well. Now, the other piece that you can get into, and this is a little bit more advanced TMS functionality, you're not going to necessarily get this across all the systems out there, is some systems can even help you determine whether you should be doing this particular load should go to your fleet or go to your common carrier, right? Now some customers will or some shippers will, I'll say, less dynamically want to do that, so that becomes a little bit less of an issue for them. But if you want to make some dynamic load assignment decisions or tender decisions between your fleet and common carriers, that's usually coming through a TMS. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of shippers will have a system to operate their fleet from a routing and scheduling and fleet management standpoint, and then have a separate
Yeah.
TMS system that is really focused more on the common carrier side of their business.
Gotcha. So I I've never worked on as a private fleet, right? I've never managed private fleet. I've come from the side of asset and brokerage on as a provider, right? LTL and truckload, ocean, air, all that stuff from both asset and non-asset side. And it seems to me that there's specific parameters to your business that make having a private fleet the right choice. But sometimes I've had shippers that had them. I just don't understand why they did. It just didn't make any sense to me. And some of the answers that I got were just absolutely ridiculous. Well, having these 500 trucks running around as a billboard, I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, but you're an industrial business. So the chances of someone seeing the side of your truck for the amount of money you're paying doesn't make any sense. What is that balance? Is there insight there? Do you have insight there for what is the balance? That what makes it optimal to have a private fleet versus not, or can you really say?
I don't know if I would go and say that there's one rule that says it's optimal. I kind of look at it as your financial portfolio, right?
Yeah,
Your financial portfolio has stocks, bonds, maybe some real estate, commodities, and whatnot in it to to diversify your holdings so you're not beholden to one particular financial instrument. For a lot of shippers, they really have to look at their transportation in the same kind of portfolio way. Um,
yeah,
there's seldom any shipper, at least that I work with, who should be 100% just going to common carrier or 100% fleet, right?
uh,
It just doesn't it doesn't typically work that way. As you said, there's plenty of places where it just doesn't make sense to send your fleet. You got no backhaul that you're going to be able to to get if you run empty the whole way back. I mean, that's incredibly inefficient.
right,
Um, and so there's lanes in pretty much every shipper's network that are ripe for irregular common carrier type moves. But on the flip side, there's also usually plenty of lanes and trips that you can build some nice static routes or consistent routes for that are cheaper and probably more consistently run by a private or dedicated fleet.
yeah,
So my view is that it should be a part of pretty much any I'll say at least moderately sized shipper's portfolio. Because there's always going to be some place where it makes sense from a cost standpoint, but again, it's also a hedge against capacity as well, right? When right now, it's not necessarily a problem to find truckload capacity.
right, yeah.
We're in a soft market, but rewind 3 years ago, it's a different certainly a different story.
3 years ago, you might have been able to make more money just selling your capacity than running your own product.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, in
Exactly.
reality, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's there's always some movement that happens around what goes fleet, what goes common carrier, what should the size of that fleet be. But it's really hard to start up a fleet when the market is going crazy and rates are up and everyone's looking for capacity. So it's not something you can just turn on a dime and and try and do. So
I
our
imagine it's
belief
something you want to scale as well, right? I mean, part of
exactly.
your optimization model's got to be if you walk in, all right, if you've got an established region, then you pretty much know where your delivery is densified enough that you're going to run your own private fleet. But as you move into a new one, you're using outsource and maybe building up your own fleet as you go, right?
Yep,
Is that
for
kind of
sure.
having that flexibility, right?
Yeah, exactly. And your network changes every single year as a shipper.
Yeah.
Carriers' networks change every single year because all their shippers' networks are changing all that time as well. So
Well, yeah, and
the,
all the bids and rebids and
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. So the idea that it's a set it and forget it type of exercise to evaluate where that fleet makes sense is obviously false, right? It's not something you can look at once every 10 years. It's got to be more often than that. But back to your original question that started it off. Like I think at least 10% of every shipper's network should be run on some kind of fleet. Like that's kind of the minimum that I think
Really?
usually
Either
exists.
private or dedicated? Is that what you're talking about? Private or
Yeah,
dedicated?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like there's, and again, it's, kind of a similar thing that you hear between, yeah, you should have 60% stocks, 40% bonds. It's kind of the, if you push me for, for a number, that's kind of where I would start. And then, as you look at their network and business, that number goes up or down, but it can go significantly up. But that's
Yeah.
kind of
I mean, Coca-Cola or Pepsi on certain areas, they should absolutely have way
they're
more than
huge. Yeah.
10%, right?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
you don't want to be putting their cases of Pepsi on a residential delivery, a whole Old Dominion trailer or something like that, and delivering to the Circle K's all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's specialized equipment, right? I mean, that's got to be a consideration as the specialized delivery needs, right?
Yeah, and like you're talking about route trucks serving supermarkets, right? I mean
Yes, yeah, that type of thing.
that's certainly a different thing than your example earlier of an industrial manufacturer who's shipping
Yeah, I just
PVC, right?
they made this product and it's a very common product that people buy but it's one of those products where nobody goes into a store and says, "Hey, give me that brand." They go in and they look for specific. I just don't want to get too specific about it, but you go into it's like buying uh, furniture, right?
Yeah,
It is you go into a furniture store and you don't necessarily go in there and say, "Hey, give me XYZ or give me Lazy Boy." It's like who's got the best recliner, and then the brand is secondary. So you know
yeah. Well,
that
the
type
other
of thing.
piece that you hit on regarding equipment is I think also relevant. Like the more specialized your equipment is,
Yeah,
the more likely that some type of fleet structure is going to make sense, because it's difficult for a common carrier to invest in some kind of specialized equipment without a commitment with specialized equipment without a commitment from their customer that it's going to be well utilized, right? So if you're doing specialty equipment, we'll see that as a good reason for a shipper to have a fleet, because they need this for their particular deliveries, and it's also the same thing. I mean, getting into sustainability a little bit. I mean, it's also why you see a lot more of the alternative fuels and EVs right now is really around fleets. You're not seeing a lot of that in common carrier trucking. It's more on the fleet side because
well, it's that
it's
fueling need too, right?
exactly. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
You need the commitment there to make the investment to make some of these alternative fuel and EV programs in any way viable at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah, exactly. What is are there advantages, disadvantages between a dedicated service fleet or you're buying your own fleet? It would seem to me that I would be heavily opposed or heavily lean towards hiring a dedicated fleet than actually having to manage my own fleet. Because now I can call up Kevin and say, "Dude, your driver fell out. Find another one." I don't have to go do that, right? As a very simple example. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean it's a trade off, right? I mean you're if you are hiring a dedicated fleet, you're obvious like the dedicated fleet is there to make some money, so you're paying them some margin, right?
Sure.
Um, and so that you could look at it and say, okay, well, if I have this here and internally, then I'm not having to pay out that margin. It might be cheaper, but then you have to think of all of the other costs that come into that. You just talked about it from a hiring firing standpoint.
Yeah, that's just
You have
one
equipment.
small part of HR. That's a big expense, right?
Exactly. You got equipment. You got to have maintenance. You got to, the piece that scares probably a lot of shippers away is liability and insurance, right? Is,
Mm, mm.
hey, they just don't want to have that kind of, that kind of liability and exposure. Um, so I think we've probably seen, certainly over the last, decade or so, if someone doesn't have a private fleet, they're seldom starting one. They're doing exactly what you're saying and going to a
Yeah.
dedicated fleet. And we're
Well,
even seeing some folks get out of the private fleet business and convert that private fleet really to a dedicated fleet and getting it off their books. But
yeah.
I don't think they'll ever go away by any stretch.
Yeah. I
There's
think
lots of huge ones that are going to exist for a long time.
yeah, proclaiming that anything is going to take over 100% or go away 100% is
Exactly.
ridiculous. It's like somebody saying, "Hey, that record's never going to be broken." Yeah, baloney. But do you think that that your emissions, the push to reduce emissions in your scopes and scope threes versus scope ones and all that, and push to go green in your transportation. And even if it's not transportation, these manufacturers and people, they're not transportation companies that actually have their own fleets. That's not their core competency, right? In most cases. So is that a deterrent now? Is that becoming more of a force in deciding whether to have a dedicated service or your own fleet? Is there a difference there, or do you guys get into that at all?
Um, I haven't really seen that be one of the determining factors when someone's doing the fleet evaluation. I mean, the reality is the shippers are getting pushed to report on emissions, regardless of whether it's their fleet or they're using someone else's fleet or they're using common carriers. So
Right.
they're going to have to be able to report on it one way or another. And I don't think it really drives it drives it that much. If anything, I guess a somewhat nefarious, shipper's like, hey, if I get these assets off my books, then I won't, I'll be able to call this a scope three emission instead of a scope one that's directly controlled by me. But I mean, it doesn't really change that there's an emission associated with it. So
It doesn't, but it changes where your internal intelligence can be
yeah,
focused, right? And
yep,
that's what I mean is they look at it as, well, there's this extra drain that now tips it to the side where I need to again call Kevin and say, hey, you need to reduce your emissions. I don't have to worry about that anymore, right? I I don't know if that's
yeah,
good, bad, or indifferent. It just seems like it might be a motivating factor now to deal with, because fleets are going to be, if you're going to go EV, well, 3 to 5 times more expensive than a regular ICE, right?
yep, yep. And any of the shippers that we're working with, on they are only really being able to go towards EV with tons of incentives, right? It in long certainly in anything approaching long haul trucking or even short haul trucking,
Yeah.
without some incentives, it's not really viable to do it yet.
No, it really isn't. And it ruins I mean, it does, it reduces the capacity. I mean, the weight alone just kills the capacity. It's a huge difference. Um, and when you're going long miles and trying to stuff trailers, utilization is massive. Um, Especially if you're doing LTL type of work, right?
Yeah,
If you're
yeah,
doing delivery type of work or even milk runs, that cube utilization is, I mean, there's businesses built on trying to find partial capacity as you do your milk run and fill it, right?
yep.
Um, what about for hire, not for hire in your private fleets, that type of stuff? I mean, like you said, going to be able to get backhauls and that type of stuff in a booming market, I would imagine that's something you really want to get into. You work with those type of data and that type of route optimization, as well as finding loads for those backhauls back from the DCs or wherever they might be delivering their product.
We won't do that as directly, that piece of it. But yeah, there's certainly there's certainly like consortiums out there that with all of the benchmarking data that they're collecting are able to see whose networks fit
Yeah,
with one another. We did something for food manufacturers a couple years ago where we looked at all of these various shippers that were shipping into grocery stores and whatnot. They're obviously going a lot of the same places, and trying to look at, hey, how could we better, if we look across multiple shippers, find backhauls, because a lot of them had their own private fleets, right? Where can we find some backhauls across their networks? Where can we also, if we got really, really adventurous and said, hey, can we ship some of this, some more of this stuff together? That is
Yeah.
obviously a little bit harder with competitors and whatnot. But, if you get those kind of data sources where you can bring a bunch of shippers, manufacturers, retailers data together and look across it, that can help fleets find some backhaul opportunities. We certainly did that in the Chainalytics days, quite a bit with our with our benchmarking service before we sold it to DAT.
Gotcha. All right. So yeah, so there's so you're the offspring of a bunch of different information that went intelligence that went different ways. You got stuff that went to DAT, the old dial a truck, right? And it used to be
Yep.
Chainalytics and all that kind of stuff. That's really interesting. So Kevin, listen, thank you first of all for doing this. This is a great insight into private fleets, because we haven't had anybody on here doing private fleets, and certainly not from a data perspective. This is really tremendous. Who needs to get in touch with you, and how do they do that?
We are primarily working with the shipper community, right? So
Yeah.
it's usually the folks who are running private fleets or investigating, dedicated fleets and where to use them in their network, that we're typically working with. So
Gotcha.
those, directors and VPs of transportation or, internal fleets is who we're typically talking to. And they can obviously get a hold of us, in any way, shape, or form, whether that's LinkedIn, and try and find us on the web. On the web, it's actually a little harder to find us on the NTT data website than it used to be, but can certainly look for supply chain consulting at NTT Data, or reach out to me directly at kevin.zweier@nttdata.com.
Yeah, that's perfect. And you can do it. I was able to do it through your website. So just about anybody can do it. You just keep drilling through the services, get the transportation going. You can find it.
They certainly have a lot of services, so it's a little bit harder to find. But hey, I have one quick funny little tidbit that I just learned about our parent company. NTT
Oh, okay.
invented emojis. So
Get
I can
out of
now
here.
say I work for the company that invented emojis. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's
NTT
a fun
invented
fact.
well, the only reason you're going to get in trouble is there's certain people who are beholden to certain emojis that aren't there anymore. So if they had anything to do with removing certain emojis, then you might have a problem on your hands. Listen, if you want an emoji back, get a hold of Kevin Zweier. He's the one who can bring back your emoji.
or I'll make sure to respond with the appropriate one.
There you go. Yeah. And I'm sorry about your background. I wanted Cubert on here. It would have been a great talking point. I don't know if you have you don't have an actual 3-dimensional Cubert, do you?
Yeah, no, I don't. That's only in the digital background. I don't have a cool Cubert. I have a Philly Fanatic, but I don't think you can see him. He's cut off on the screen. But
the Philly Fanatic is fantastic. As a matter of fact, it's one of my wife's favorites. It's one of her favorite mascots. We watched it last year during last fall. Obviously, they were on there quite a bit. But anyways, yeah, fantastic show. Thank you so much, Kevin. Hey, listen, everybody, thank you for tuning into FEI Freight Executive Insights. I'm Mike Vincent. He's Kevin Zweier. Look him up if you're looking for you need transportation advice on doing a private fleet or managed fleet or whatever. If you're a shipper, you got to look them up and get some information from them. He can help you out quite a bit. So anyways, we'll talk to you guys next time.
all right, thanks for having me.